James,
What's up?
look who I got. All right, guys, we are in for a treat for the fifth episode of Second Leap. I have the James Arnold. So I met this guy through Southeastern. He was not a student, but we hung out a lot way back, maybe 2013, 14, maybe somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
13, 14.
Yeah, so we were kind of friends of friends. We hung out in the same circles. And all of a sudden, James was gone. And I was like, what happened to James? I kind of asked around, like, hey, how come we don't see him anymore? And the friends we had at the time were like, like he's kind of going through something right now. Let's just give him some time. And I was like, oh, okay. So James wasn't a student at my college, but I just never saw you again. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay. But then we were friends on Facebook, and I was like, okay, James is working at this gay club. All right. That's good. I'm like, okay. I mean, I guess I'm like, does he still go to church or anything? I'm like, I don't think so. And I was like, whatever happened to James? Like, what was he doing? Like, dude, he just had, like, I don't know. No one was ever straight with me with what happened. It was always years later when I asked about it, people were like, oh, he had the whole thing with the thing and, like, he's gay. And I was like, I mean, I knew he was like, struggled, if we want to use that word.
Oh, that word.
But I was like, I didn't know the event that happened to where you were in my world and now you're out and no one really wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
So now 2020, me kind of sitting around going through like, whatever happened to these people? You liked what you saw with our friend Sam, and then you decided to be on the show. Like, hey, why don't I just kind of talk about what exactly happened in Wake Forest? So real quick, I just want to ask, uh, where are you from, and exactly how did I meet you? Exactly, how did you end up where I was?
Good question. So I'm originally from Louisiana, born and raised in central Louisiana, which was home to this, I guess, in the Southern Baptist Convention, a pretty well-known school called Louisiana College. A small private school, I think, maybe a couple of thousand students maximum. Um, and I ended up going to college there. Was a biblical studies major, minor in biblical languages. So like that's how I kind of got to know. If any the listeners go to Southeastern, they might know Dr.Quarles by name. He was my Greek professor for most of my time there. Jason Meyer, who took over preaching at John Piper's church, it was John Piper's mentee, and so it was. I went to school there, got exposed to a lot of highly intellectual academics, at least that thought at like a higher level. So that was really cool. But spent 4 years there, and that was kind of when shit started to hit the fan. And about the fourth year, end of my junior year, I think, or mid junior year through senior year, I didn't finish school. I didn't get a degree from there, because there was kind of this like precursor. I had kind of like a taste of what it would be like to live in a world with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Our college president, who was just fucking nuts, and kind of went off the rails, abuse of power, misappropriation of funds, was vindictive, wanted to control every like information that got out through like forms of media, the newspaper and local news and all that kind of stuff. So it really was just professors were leaving left and right. We lost a lot of contracts, weren't renewed for a lot of professors that were like really good, high quality professors. And Dr.Quarles was one of the ones that they went after. And Dr.Quarles had convinced these like multimillionaire donors to like fund a master's program in create a divinity school essentially, because he would be in charge of it. And when the school started going after him and he was getting ready to leave, they like pulled millions of dollars worth of funding per year. So it just became a very toxic, bad situation fast. And we were being told by like several of like the staff that we trusted, the administrators and professors, to find a way out, like get out of here, go somewhere else and finish. They were actively encouraging us to leave. So I just around the same time, I kind of started to really grapple with the fact that I wasn't straight. Because it was one of those situations where I remember there was one student who I got accused of being gay or like having a guy in his room. I don't know what all was proven, but like he ended up being expelled. So like it was the kind of the typical like, you know, don't smoke, don't drink, don't have sexual relations, that kind of stuff. And that was grounds for expulsion if you know, participated in that. It was, I think it was a little easier at LC than it was at Southeastern, because we weren't just like a seminary or Bible college. We had like, you know, math majors, science majors, art, music, theater, all that kind of stuff. So it was like a wide range of things, but it was just a school that was funded by and owned by the Southern Baptist Convention, essentially. And that was around the time that like I experimented with a guy for the first time. Started getting like exploring my sexuality a little more actively. Was hiding a lot of this, confessed it at one point to a couple of people. And at the same time, like I was being very vocal about my disdain for the president and and like some of his cronies who were like helping him. And so like I was quickly building this like rebel, like I guess, image of myself. Or like I just kind of wasn't willing to be quiet about it. Like I wasn't okay with how some people were kind of going along with it. And so at the end of after my senior year, it's my 4th year at school, I don't have a degree. The president is still kind of doing his thing. And some friends who came to Southeastern said, we know you're trying to leave Louisiana. Why don't you come live with us at Wake Forest, North Carolina, and you can try to figure it out from there. Because I thought I was going to go to Southeastern. Ended up, my application ended up getting rejected because the pastor who I asked for a recommendation was like, no, you're not spiritually ready for this. So yeah. So it was one of those things where like, all right, whatever. So I was like, I'll just live here and figure life out anyway. I was glad to get out of Louisiana, you know, because it's kind of, for the most part, it's a pretty boring state. Like there's not much there. Like if you're not in New Orleans, there's just not much else that the state has to offer. I feel like, if you're like me anyway. So I was happy to get out, and then found they lived off. I forget some of the housing, like where a lot of the married couples end up living, kind of like down the hill from Southeastern.
Okay.
They were living there and had a guest bedroom that they let me stay in. Found a roommate, found a place to rent. My roommate, really cool guy. He's one of the few people I feel like I still have a good relationship with, even though we haven't talked in a while. He and his wife and their 2 kids, like great people. But yeah, that's kind of where my introduction to Wake Forest started, and then Southeastern, and you know, running around Wake Forest and trying to figure life out. And so that's when I ran into, you know, people like you and Sam and Luke and you know, I probably couldn't mention all the other names. Sam Flynn.
Yeah. I haven't heard that name in a while.
Yeah, me neither.
But real quick, I wanna go back. Just because I know for me, a little different of a case, but still going to a school where, like you said, it's just Bible college, very small, and a very kind of astute seminary. There wasn't a culture where you could just break covenant openly, because I think you can go like Liberty and just do kind of whatever because it's so big and like whatever. But at Southeastern, it was like I didn't know anyone who was drinking because someone would tell on you. And there is no being alone with someone of the opposite sex with the door closed. And so there is no, we can be elusive. Like, no, dude, you have to get rid of all evidence. Then, especially if you wanted to, you know, mess around, not even go all the way, just a little mess around. Like, if anyone knows what this is, like, your grounds for expulsion. Now, for me, I always told, looking back, I was like, dude, I was such a vampire because I would I would just walk around, and you have to give people the look of like, hey, I'm down if you're down. And if they're not, because if it doesn't work out and if they fold, it's over for you. Because
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like it's my third year. I'm God forbid I'm 20 years old. I'm sorry. And you give someone the look, like, all right, like, no, she's gonna fold it. You can't look, don't look at her. And so I know the pressure of being there. But then, like you, it's like, experimenting. Was there fear um going about it when you were at LC? Did you kind of worry, or were you just kind of like a F it, like, if it happens, it happens? Because for me, I was terrified of,
Yeah.
like, I can't trust anybody. I don't know.
Yeah. There was a lot of fear. There was a fear of being caught. And I for someone who's gay, like, most of us naturally, like, we understand very early on that, especially growing up in the South, you have to hide it regardless of what your situation is religiously, like whether you're at LC or you're at it's just kind of like what you have to do to feel safe and protected, and like you don't want people to find out because you don't know how they're going to react. um and so I did, the first guy that I ever started seeing, of course, some guy who went to LC was looking over his shoulder and saw my name come up and then started like hounding me with questions about it. And I'm come to find out he was okay with it. Like, he wasn't going to out me or anything, but he just wanted me to tell the truth. Um, and so like I managed to hide a lot, fortunately, because I, didn't really know what was going to happen if a lot of people found out. And there are a lot of things that we could get away with at LC, because I think that part of studying under people who are like at a higher academic level, like, there are a lot of my fellow majors who like thought that the you couldn't drink and you couldn't smoke rule was just stupid, like it was just dumb. They'd be like, John Calvin or Charles Spurgeon did it, and like, there's a bunch of Calvinists who are like, fuck it, let's drink a beer and smoke a cigar. So like, there were some of my college friends and guys in my same major. We'd grab a cigar and go down to the levee on the river and smoke. Because we knew what was really important. But obviously being gay was not quite on the same level in their eyes. It wasn't going to fly. So there was a lot of hiding that went on, things that I kept to myself. And then, being kind of combative with the idea of how the president was running things, I kind of was getting a lot of isolation anyway. Like, there are a lot of people that just were not hanging out with me or didn't care to anymore. And that's kind of when I really started to find the room to explore my sexuality and, embrace a little bit more of who I was, versus dealing with all this like internalized anger and homophobia and depression and anxiety that was just constantly affecting every area of my life. And if I think being a Bible major had a little bit more protection, because like naturally everybody who worked at the school was a Christian, and like the people with a lot of authority or professors or whatever all went to church, and for the most part. And so like if you were a Bible major who was willing to confess what you did, like you had probably a little more protection than the math major who's like hitting up someone every other weekend, in the neighborhood. Or if you're a football player, apparently the football players all had like a massive orgy with alcohol, but they like, the president loves football and bringing in students for that, so they got off scot-free.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Okay, so on the way to Wake Forest, I'm guessing you're in the car, you're on the way up. Did you have a plan B of, maybe this doesn't work out? Did that ever cross your mind of like, I'm going to this far off land, I heard about these are good people, I get to start over? Was there ever of like, if I see this and that, I think I'll just have to come back? Or was it like, yeah, I better figure it out in North Carolina?
I think it was I had better figure it out, but I didn't know that that's what it was.
Hmm.
I think I was like naive, where like, this sounds fun, I'll do that. And like, actually you got to pay bills and survive, if you want to live somewhere that's not Louisiana. And I think that's probably one of the few times in my life that being naive kind of worked in my favor. And I had support. Like, I kind of expected I would find support with like the people that I lived with and like the community that I kind of jumped into. And a lot of the guys that I went to school with in Louisiana were also going to be up there. So I was like, this can't be that hard. I'll get a job, pay rent, and like figure out life. And for the most part, that worked out. Like there were a few times where like things got kind of strapped for money, but I managed to find job after job that paid better and kind of like move on in the world. Find new roommates, find better housing situations, take on a little more responsibility. So it was definitely like a no turning back thing because I was just determined that I wasn't going to turn back. I was going to figure this out. I was going to move on with my life and hopefully never have to live in Louisiana again for like an extended period of time.
Okay. All right, I got you. So you showed to Wake Forest. Now this is, I don't remember exactly the first time maybe we met, but the one of the key memories I remember, it was Wake Forest Coffee Company, and you were in there and you brought I don't know if it was an oil painting or charcoal, but it was, I think it was Robert Downing Jr. And I still remember, and for the people listening or watching this, people are drinking coffee, they're having a muffin, and you see this guy, he's like boots, handsome guy, and he's drawing something that and I'm like, are you an artist? And you're like, nah, I just do a little something here and there. And I was like, you have like, like, I don't know if it was an apron or something, like, it's like, you look like you do this.
Yeah.
Like, you look like a professional. And I'm like, I'm in the corner, I'm just posted up, grab a muffin, and I'm going to do this. And you would do that. And I was like, oh my God, look at this guy. Like, he's like, he can do anything. But then you would pull out this Bible. And it's not just a Bible. Like, this is Greek.
Yeah.
He has a true Greek Bible. And you're reading it or looking through it as if you're doing something. Because for me, if I pulled it out, I'm like, just to be pretentious. And I was like, James, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, like, I was biblical languages. And so you'd have like a Hebrew one and like a Greek one. And I was like, so you're telling me you drew this and you can read, or at least to the point where you have it on you, and you look like this. And I'm like, James, okay. And I thought, honestly, like, I'm like, this guy, because you were so, I just interpreted it as so much like more than talent, but I was just like, dude, like, this guy just gifted, great. But then I remember, just as we started talking and social circles, I do remember it wasn't, because I was trying to understand the Louisiana thing and leaving, because as I was thinking through it, I was like, dude, that'd be such a big thing. Because to me, I interpret it as like, this guy like leaves home to come to this far off land of North Carolina with a professor, which is kind of like a relationship that could easily, the professor could be like, all right, I'm going this way. You're just a kid. And you come here with, I'm sure, some ghosts, something haunting you. And then I knew there were the same sex attraction Christians.
Yeah.
And I knew that you were in that group. And I'm like, so I just saw you as such a complicated person dealing with some form of shame. I never knew exactly where you stood, but at the same time, I do know, just to survive socially, you kind of have to play along of like, I don't approve of this. And I know, like, even if he didn't want to tell the truth, it's like, I feel like they have to kind of go along with these things, even though you mean like, oh, some things I agree with, some things I don't. It's kind of like wink wink. uh
Yeah. Yeah. I so like, don't give me too much credit. I probably did pull those Bibles out too because I was pretentious. Like, don't, like, the most that training that those years in college have done for me have helped me like read some tattoos off the fly. Like, that's about as far as that got. So I can look real impressive to like secular people who don't know Greek or Hebrew but like the tattoos. So like, that's, I look good at parties when I do that. Um, I like, and it's funny you mentioned like the way that I'm dressed, because there was a lot of pressure for, it's not even like there are a lot of gay people who like take pride in how well they're like how good of a fashion sense they have. But ever since I have come out and like been more comfortable with myself, it's gone to shit. Like I wear like whatever t-shirt I can find, like a pair of shorts, whether or not it matches. I just don't care anymore. But there was kind of this game that you have to play when you're hiding it. Like I felt like I was trying to model myself after what I thought the typical millennial Bible believer churchgoer looked like it did. And that was one thing that got really frustrating for me, was I felt like if I didn't wear enough like the right jeans or the right boots or the right cardigan or like have the right tattoo and like be pretentious about the right cup of coffee and listen to Mumford Sons all day, like I was, not. I kind of figured out that inside I was never gonna be the guy that any girl at Southeastern was looking for.
Yeah.
And I personally hate having a beard, so like that was another strike against me. Like it felt like to be a good growth group member, you had to have a beard, and I was like, I hate it. I don't like having facial hair. It's terrible. Great for other people, right? Good. Like you rock it, but yeah, there were a lot of things that it felt like I kind of had to maintain. And I think part of why I was so good is I did, the last time I drew anything was my future father-in-law, or my future father-in-law wanted to get a Christmas present for his wife, and my future mother-in-law, and it was this big like collage portrait of like them, their family throughout the years and their wedding picture and all that. And that was like 2 years ago, I think, at this point. So like I haven't drawn in a while. And I think the reason that like I excelled at it so much is it was kind of an outlet for dealing with, it was a form of, I guess, me trying to validate myself, but also just kind of an outlet for dealing with a lot of like anxiety and stress and like internalized homophobia or hatred towards myself. And that just kind of spilled over into this like intense concentration. Not that I didn't enjoy doing it. I do enjoy being creative and being an artist, but I think now that a lot of that pressure internally has disappeared, so is the drive to constantly need to do that.
Yeah.
It's got, it's got its advantages and disadvantages. I feel like I still feel like a professional artist who could go back and continue, pick that up and keep going, but I don't really feel like the need like to do it like I have been. I feel accomplished in that sense. So there was definitely kind of a front being put up at that time. I was trying to find the right people to hang out with, trying to find where I fit in. One guy I had got to know pretty well and was hanging out with. He was actually, I think he got kicked out of Southeastern. He took a semester off. It never went back. But he was somebody who like had dated the most popular beautiful girl. You know who I'm talking about, but I'm not mentioning her name. Okay. But he was just this cool guy, this like hipster guy, this indie guy. Was into like coffee and being cool and Volkswagen and like I ended up, we were hanging out a lot and having a good time being friends, and I thought, I was like, okay, cool, I can like maybe confide in this guy that like I'm not like trying to hit on you or date you. I just like, I'm gay. I don't know if that's a problem. And come to find out it was, and he just cut me off completely. And so I was like, all right, that sucks. That's not cool. And so I experienced, I felt like the more people knew about me being gay, it kind of felt like I was getting shortchanged in a lot of areas, where like girls would hold it against me, or like they'd be like, he's attracted to guys. He's attracted to guys. He's like, like there's that hesitation that's there. Yeah. I think a lot of that had to do with, like being in college as well, like trying to, like, there are very few gay men who can successfully hide the fact that they're gay. Like it starts to leak out at some point, some way or another, and people catch on. So I think that kind of became a disadvantage, the more life kind of went on. Yeah, I kind of could see it being held against me, even if like subconsciously.
Yeah, and I think even just, me not being gay, but I still felt psychological pressures to just me being a student and going to church and then going to chapel, and then I had to be a part of all these other things, there was a huge psychological toll that even for me, like I had to get out. Um, yeah, I just lost my train of thought, but
Yeah, that
um,
that I never really got. I guess it was because by the time that I met a lot of people at Southeastern, I had already been through college for 4 years, and so I kind of had a few miles under my belt as far as that experience goes. So I didn't, and as somebody who was never actually a student, I wasn't submerged in all the things that kind of put you through. So like
mm,
I, for the most part, was oblivious um, to what a lot of you went through. I guess like at that point kind of assumed that any kind of Christian college is quirky. Like it's just it's just weird. That's just what we do. And then at some point later, I began to think, I was like, this is a school that says it's a school, but constantly attempts to behave like it's a church.
yes, that was James. That was a huge contention with me and all my friends, people I knew. It was like we didn't understand because what we saw, especially for me, the 5 years that I was there were like church decisions being made from faculty and cabinet. Like the same way that you would see like maybe a pastor was involved with something at the church, and they're kind of free to handle it the way they want to handle it. But the faculty would do the same thing because they were all also pastors. You would just see a faculty member and ha ha he he, and I got a Hebrew quiz coming up, and all of a sudden they're gone and you don't know why, and they won't tell you, and that's it. Please do not. And I've seen this happen like 3 times of my time at Southeastern. Um, but what I really wanted to ask you was theologically, how did you handle? Because it sounds like you told yourself, like, look, I'm gay. I don't think there's any going away with this. I think this is just the way it is. Um, but a lot of people just can't see it theologically, like, because if you were to come out, I guess the fear that I interpret is that no one will accept me. It's almost like this cannot fit in this system. So how? But people say like you're trying to read something in the scripture that's not there, and I just always had a hard time because I would look at scripture and I'm like, look, it just sounds like it is what it is. But at the same time, I was like, if I was gay, it's just like I wouldn't know how to be gay and Christian the way that maybe we saw Christianity. Of like, I don't know how both of these can exist. I know that people try to make this exist. I know that there are denominations where like, hey, let's go with the flow. But I think for you, someone who's so intelligent saw the hermeneutical problem of of reading scripture and just seeing like as a complicated problem. And I want to know for you, did you see it as, is this complicated, or no, guys, you're just being dumb. People can be gay and Christian at the same time and live open, happy lives.
Yeah. I think a lot of it for me, like I think that if you're gonna be gay or if you're gonna struggle with same-sex attraction or whatever, the church or like in this case Southeastern kind of want you to fit into like this predetermined category of you know it's almost like you're treated like somebody who has a special condition or like I don't want to say disease, like maybe it's not that extreme, but there's just like a place you're meant to fit into. And I, not to kind of spoil what I'll talk about later in the recording, but I think a lot of it was, there's so much more time, there's especially growing up in modern America in the South, there's typically so much more tied to a person, maybe as baggage or psychological or mental, problems or issues to work out when you're gay. And if you're growing up in a home where you can't express that or talk about it out of fear, you've got this repressed issue that is building up inside of you that you've never been taught or had the chance to explore or understand. And suddenly you're being held accountable to it, like your life depends on it. Like it's kind of like you get wheeled into court and like, okay, explain yourself. Like,
Mm.
I don't know. Like, this is the way I've always been. I certainly never talked to mom and dad about it, because I got kind of a hint of what their reaction would be. So you suddenly want me to divulge and untangle this, what is often it involves some sort of like psychological or mental trauma, or even if it's something you're doing to yourself incrementally over the years, and this you're suddenly put on the stand and you got to be held accountable for it, and often by people who aren't qualified to help you. Not that they're helping the situation, but like people who just aren't qualified to untangle this to begin with. And so I don't really know that there was a point where I was questioning and trying to ascertain like what theologically do I think about this. And like I've listened to I've listened to other people. Like I know a couple of gay people in the community who like still actively go to church, and like some form of Christianity is present in their life consistently, and they have sort of the stereotypical arguments for like why the Bible is actually okay with being gay and et cetera. And I haven't really did not dive into those very heavily. I think that there were other concerns that kind of put too much pressure on my life, and for the sake of my mental health, was like ready to just kind of back away and not feel like I had to have an answer for this right now, because I was getting to a breaking point. And so I guess out of what feels like self-preservation, I'm just kind of like I'm tired of being asked. I'm tired of people constantly asking me to give an account for my life when you can't give me a valid reason why I should be doing this to begin with. Like you're not giving me a good explanation. I feel like if you're going to tell me why me being gay is wrong, then like, can you give me an adequate explanation as to why I was born this way? And I very easily could have not have been. Like, why is this something that's hardwired into me genetically? And so a lot of it was just kind of like, I'm ready to just back away and just breathe for once, and not kind of be examined constantly. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a part of it felt like it was just a sense of self-preservation, because it was wearing me down to a point where like I didn't want to live with this pressure anymore, or this like shame or this guilt that I was constantly feeling if I didn't live up. And the crazy thing was, like, I guess the nature of being gay is, it's crazy how like there are so many sins that you can do, that you can get away with because no one ever sees them. But if like the second something appears gay, it's instantly condemned by the church. Like it feels like that most people in the church would be content for me to, like, if I hid being gay from them, that's fine. Just show up church and don't show up with a guy. Like, there's kind of this, just like, there has to be this appearance of this isn't happening, so we're not going to like question or worry about it.
Yeah, and I because I can think of a few people where the community or the church body itself would be very happy if, say, you came in like, oh, this is my girlfriend. Everyone looks like, oh, at least he's trying. And then you get engaged and then you get married, and then maybe have bouts where you're just like, I don't know why I don't. Maybe I'm kind of sad some days or some not. And people are just like, well, you're trying. I mean, we kind of we see what God says about this, and you're doing your best. And to them, it's just like, what could you do? But for the person actually going through it, you're like, hey, how about I don't make my own life miserable?
Yeah.
And so I hate it because there were so few people. Because to me, I'm like, you're just not being creative about this kind of problem. I'm like, look, all of these just result in suicide at the end of it. And I'm like, so can you can you back up for a second, or give an account for my sins, or give an account for my life, like you're saying? And I definitely see how exhausting that is, because you know, I had some interrogations myself, but God, it was so even I just know, to wrap this up, I just know some people, sometimes their problems are hermeneutic or rational, but even for me, it's like, you know, I leave because it's a cultural problem. Like I just can't be here. Or and it
Yeah.
sounds like for you, it's like it's existential. I'm like I can't survive in this kind of climate, so I have to back out. So I think it's very interesting that there are a lot of people leave for different reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
I think, and I also think that like the unfortunate attitude that a lot of people in on the other side of the aisle tend to have is like, oh, he left. Well, then he just was a backslider. He like he couldn't trust in God or continue to
You're a parable.
yeah, right. Like no, maybe you made it insufferable. Like maybe you made it miserable to be a part of. Like um this idea that like it has to, you have to keep the kitchen at like 100 degrees, and if you can't handle it then get out. Like why don't you just make it comfortable to be here? um and like there were some attempts by people to like try to, I guess, and like they were aware that I was a single person, and I'm sure in their minds like, oh, he's never going to get a girl, like listen to him talk. um and they were like, so let's make it feel a part of the community, and like, hey, we're having a Super Bowl party. Great. I don't give a fuck about the Super Bowl. Like, do sports, or like, let's hang out for an hour. I'm like, and like, I don't go to Chick-fil-A. Like, so it's not like, I guess, and I don't think these people like were intentionally malicious or like apathetic. Like I think that some of them genuinely cared and tried, but um, I think that the gay community tends to be a point of contention with the church, as far as like there's not really an effort to truly understand or like reach out to them. Like it's super easy to send a mission group to witness to some Muslims or like brown kids on a different continent whose government has fucked everything up for them, and they don't speak English and they're single white people the first time. Like those mission trips are probably a lot easier than um, you know dealing with the gay people in your community who disagree with you because of the way you treated them. Like it's kind of like it's your fault. Like there's plenty of opportunity for you to like rectify this and try to build that relationship. But the church contributed heavily to the formation of the LGBT group. Surprisingly, like we had to have these safe spaces to get away, and in doing that kind of like exodus into our own safe spaces created this own community that began to thrive. um, and a lot of that is also due to the work that a lot of Black people felt through racial injustice, and yeah, the LGBT community exists primarily because of them, in almost every way. And so it's just kind of this like mass exodus away from this, what sounds like great theology, but in practice is just horrible in the way people are treated. And now we're in this community where we're like, you've got to give us a reason to want to listen to what you have to say or trust you.
Yeah.
So that I think has a lot to do with it seems to me to be a much better explanation than just like, oh, he couldn't handle the faith, so he took off. Like, yeah, it's that simple.
So I I've left for other reasons, but when I think about you and your situation, I'm like, I don't see how people are gay and still go to church or choose to after all this, after the phone calls, the harassment, the accusations, you still want to go and be a part of this. But I'm literally getting people on this show to ask them, so what are you doing? Because this is what I'm doing, kind of like post church, post evangelical, of like, all right, I feel like we know too much, and uh, I don't even know where to go or what to do. Um, but it just seems like that reaction, that answer of like, I guess I mean I can just go back and kind of do it the way I want to do it. it's I just think that's just too like no. Like we're not going back. Now do you feel some type of way about people who go back to church? Um, because I don't know, I kind of make a face when people do that. I'm like, what, like what? Like, wait, of all the places to go, you want to come back here? Like, are you serious?
I guess it depends on. I know there's a couple of people, there's a gay couple that we're good friends with, that we have a lot of respect for. And my fiance, he's an atheist, so like he's his and he even comes from a church home. Like his parents still go to a Methodist church, but they like never, I don't think in his life, and certainly not since I've met them, has it ever felt like us being gay has been an issue. They just don't care. Like that's fine. You love who you love, and they're definitely more on the liberal side of things. So like they believe in science and like you know all that kind of stuff. So, but we know people who we really respect that go to church, and like I think that I think I respect their decision to go to church because of the way they are to us, like the way they treat us. But by that I don't mean that they it's not that they never bring church up, because they haven't, but like there's a relationship of trust and respect for each other that we've worked on and that we've built and that we've maintained. And then like there are other people in the same way, like people in the community that I consider friends that go to may go to church from time to time, and like whatever, like it's a church that accepts them for who they are and doesn't try to make a claim that being gay is wrong. And so if that's what they want, then fine. It's just not. I told myself, and I've told some other people, I was like, if I ever ended up going back to a church, it would certainly not be IDC.
Yeah.
After that experience, it would have to be somewhere else. And yeah, it's. I guess maybe I am kind of like maybe there's a little PTSD. Like there's just things about church I just don't ever care to relive. And certainly what felt like maybe this facade. There were things about it that were very facade like, where it kind of felt like everybody was expected to maintain a certain attitude or a way of being, even if that wasn't authentic to who they were or how they actually felt or what they really wanted to say. And so yeah, all that combined, I don't think I don't have like any necessary disdain towards like people who go to church, but I think that's also because it tends to be people who are like not trying to constantly hound me about it. It's just kind of this mutual respect to do, like everyone can do their own thing. So
Yeah. I have such a since I left stopped going to church. I stopped going to church maybe a year before I dropped out because I just couldn't handle it anymore. But every time I try to wrap my head around it of, okay, do I want to participate in this religion that says they have truth, capital T truth? Because that means they have to make certain decisions and it's going to affect the culture that I have to be in. And through my education that I really, really enjoyed, I enjoyed some classes at Southeastern more than others, but I still have a hard time interpreting what is dogma and what is not, because from at the end of the day, as of today, I'm like, I just think it's too much dogma to be a part of this, because I think the whole thing is messy. And however way you chop it up, you have to decide why you decided to chop it up that way. And I think that is a can of worms in itself.
yeah,
To the point where I'm like, let me just separate myself from this, because it's too much of a mess. It's too complicated. I've met the most sincere people back then in Wake Forest, but at the same time, for me, I'm like, it's too much of a shit show. I'm like, I can't. And that's not even just a SBC thing, but then even when I approach being Methodist or Presbyterian or Anglican or whatever, I'm like, this just looks like a mess. I'm like, I don't know, guys. And
I
yeah,
I like you said, like I met a lot of like I was going through my phone and deleting a lot of old contacts, people I had no intention of ever speaking to again. And I, came across Dr.Quarles' number in my phone, and I was like, I'm not going to delete that. Like that, I had a little too much respect for him as a person. Because he like, and he's one of a few that like genuinely is one of the most humble, kind men I've ever met in my life. That I feel like could genuinely discern like this is a human being with their own experiences and their own, feelings and thoughts and that he always seemed to recognize the human element, no matter how lofty his theology became naturally as a result of being so studious or academic. He never seemed to lose touch with the fact that we're all still people at the end of the day. So I definitely understand that, because I've had those experiences as well. But when I left IDC, it was because I was kind of going through this constant rehashing, like this counseling with people who, like I said, weren't qualified really to do this, because there was so much more to discuss going on with me that they just were not the right people for. And just, it kind of felt like this constant beating or like this torture of going over and over the same complicated and hurtful feelings I was trying to understand myself. And eventually is what caused me to just walk away. So I feel like so much of the church, while probably getting like A's and at least attempting to have the right theology, are failing miserably in the practical application of how do I approach another person and respect and understand who they are and what they're dealing with, what they've gone through. And a lot of that's been highlighted. So like most of my removal from IDC and subsequently Southeastern, the last 4 years have been dominated by, the Trump era. And it just became more and more like when suddenly all of these people who told me to behave a certain way growing up, or like told me to display a certain way of thinking, or like, whatever, how to live the right life, were suddenly, supporting a group or a party or a man who just exhibited none of that to like a very detrimental degree. We're suddenly on board with that and like kind of okay with it because he said he was against abortion. Like I just more disenchantment and like I suddenly was like, this is why the book of James exists. Like this is the kind of bullshit I think that he was trying to get at, because suddenly we have all these social justice issues that no one on that side of the aisle seems to care about. Not to make this all political, but I think unfortunately, thanks to people like Paige Patterson, the church and the Republican Party have gotten a little intertwined too far for their own good, but that's a different story. But I just began to see like these, like where is what did the church really do when 50 people died in a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida? What's the church doing now that Trump has turned hundreds of children into immigrants at the border, and some of them have died? Like the very thing the church is told to fight for and protect, they've supported a man who is doing the opposite of that, making orphans out of these families. And so we're constantly these like social justice issues. I was like, I don't ever recall seeing the church really fight for these issues or take them up. Like you don't have to think that it's okay for me to be gay to fight for my right to be able to walk down the street and not get beat up because of it. Like you can say that you support LGBT rights to a degree, I guess, without having to say that your God says gay marriage is okay. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Regardless of whether or not someone agrees with me or what my views are, people have a right to live, and they have a right to be safe, and they have a right to be treated equally and with equity across the board. It does not matter. And so when I began to see the ball just drop constantly and begin to think back, like that's where like a lot of the shift started happening. And it was through a political lens most of the time, which I think was good for me to just kind of not view the church as quite a high pedestal as I put it at one point in my life, to kind of bring it down to a human level and like began to care a little bit more about the humanity of myself and like the people around me, the people I love, people I saw who were hurt, people who were marginalized, people who were in the minority, victims of abuse or whatever. And I began to find a lot of people that the church wasn't reaching out to. Like met some like all of the trans friends that I met through working at the club.
Mm.
Didn't know anyone before that. Didn't like I began to just encounter all different kinds of people and people who were so different from me and people who were had different backgrounds and just like maybe lived a crazy life, but I never heard about them, didn't know they existed, being at IDC or whatever. I think I'm going on a rant at this point, but getting away and kind of seeing humanity for the first time is what it felt like.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's interesting all the stuff that you see after you leave that kind of environment, like you said, like trans people, because even especially with trans, it's like, dude, we never talked about other than like theologically of like a woman and what a man is. It's like I just felt like the people that I was in class with, they wouldn't be brave enough to actually talk to someone who is trans and like, hey, all this stuff we talk about in theology class about humanity and sanctity and God's goodness. And it's just like, yeah, well, this is how you do it. You talk to, and not, and I think a big part of it, especially because like we had classes like evangelism, where it's like, dude, you had to, it was like doing sales and trying to uh, throw in a gospel conversation. And then it's another like pressure to have of just like, oh, I just had a normal conversation with a trans person about like Starbucks or whatever, like just shooting the shit. But now I feel guilty because I didn't share the gospel with them. Oh no. What if they die tomorrow? And I think that that's a part of the picture being on in that kind of environment and culture is kind of like psychologically going back is just the shame. There's so much shame in doing things and there's so much shame in not doing them.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's like, dude, that's why for me I'm like, dude, it's just too much. Like this is like now I'm being hounded for not sharing the gospel. Like, hey, maybe we just had some coffee or that kind of thing. And I think like the last time I actually like that forced me to think very hard about people who were not like me. There was a show coming out on Amazon. Maybe you heard about it. It was called Transparent. And I was like, what's this show about, James? Me and my friends at Bible college, we would watch Transparent and we would just cry every episode about trans issues, trans problems, all of the actors, actresses that got on the show. I was like, this is amazing. People aren't doing enough. And I'm like just bawling. I'm like, why can't you just call her a her? Like, will you stop? It's like what? And I started that kind of even just watching that show just made me so aware of my own bullshit of um how I would approach others. And it just I'm like at this point, I'm just like, just show some damn respect. I'm like, are we gonna die in 10 years, 30? Like, what does it matter? And but these are the problems that I think being in school, even being in that environment that had virtue and goodness and all of it, it's just like it just never talked about those things. Or even if it did, it's just when it actually happened, it was like, oh God, they just dropped the ball. Like, oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah, it that was a tearjerker of a show. I remember we watched it and we were very on edge about it. Another good show on HBO is
Was it Pose?
Pose is a good one. Pose is a really good one. I'm not a huge fan of everything Ryan Murphy does, but that one was golden. Because from what I understand, it gives you a fairly accurate, for a TV show, it gives you a fairly accurate depiction of what ballroom culture was like in New York in the 90s, especially with a lot of the Black community and trans community as well. And it has a lot of trans visibility, which is phenomenal. It's great. We need that. But We Are Here is also, it's brief synopsis. It's about 3 drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race who go on this cross country tour. And they, in each of these different towns, they meet people. Like one episode featured a mother who, like, her daughter like didn't want to have anything to do with her because she had this fight with her where she was like telling her she was going to hell, and like this is really bad situation, and like the mother wanted to apologize and it changed how, like, was using drag as a way of being like, I'm sorry, like I love you, I want to be a part of your life. Another episode where there was a trans person who he, like, I think had never really come out or like wanted to be visible and want people to respect him for who he was. And it's like, it was just the different ways people they're using drag as a medium for like people in these small towns, these middle of nowhere places, to kind of give them the visibility and the spotlight they need to like be brave enough to be themselves and to stand up for who they are and what they believe in. And again, it kind of gives them that, it kind of helps them show their humanity, which I think has been the biggest part for me, because there's a scene that is constantly speaking of HBO shows, there's the scene that constantly replays in my head, and the Watchmen TV show. At the end of the show, one of the last scenes in the last episode, Jeremy Irons, who plays Ozymandias, makes a comment to Agent Blake where he's like, you can't tell them that, we caused the squid destruction of New York, because then the world will go to war, it'll fall apart, we'll all die. Her response to him is like, yeah, they say that, but it never happens. And like every time I kind of hear these different arguments from people about like the doom and destruction, like how horrible it would be to treat people like people, I'm like, that's not, you make it out to act like the world's going to come to an end, but it never happens. Like what it does result in is people feeling like loved and respected and heard. And I think I didn't realize it, but for a while, I had kind of this resentment to the church, because it was like, here's this world of people who are like me, who are also dealing with these same kind of issues that we're kind of told to ignore and forget about. Almost like it's built into this like church culture mindset, this religious mindset of keeping the people who are on the outside need to stay there. And so I suddenly am, like I'm meeting like tons of friends who are Black. I know like that, like I finally one day realized like I didn't have a lot of Black friends, like, because it's a predominant, I feel like the church, especially, in the South and in Wake Forest, is predominantly white. IDC was prominently white.
Yeah, I was a lot of people's first Black friend in college. I was like, yeah, you're bringing that kind of energy to me. I'm like, I need you to back up.
Right. Yeah. Got introduced to like the Black Lives Matter movement and just like fighting for racial equality and equity, like something that was way bigger than I ever thought it was, coming from that kind of a background. Met people who were trans and like what they went through, met people who were bisexual and what they went through. And like, everyone's kind of everyone is in the community, but like everyone has this like unique struggle or like different things that they're fighting for or against constantly. And so, in addition to finding a community that felt like I belonged, these were my people, it also felt like I was seeing a side of humanity that just, it's like I was told never existed.
Yeah, but before we start talking about the end of your relationship with IDC, I want to, all that just made me think of, in Christianity, there was so much I just took in, especially I became a Christian when I was 15. And I was like, all right, I mean, if this is the truth, it's the truth, to the point where I went to a Bible college to suck all that stuff in. now and then dropping out, not going to church, and then critiquing so much of what I've heard. A big reason I started this project was to talk to other people of like, okay, all of this can't just be crap, because I'm like, how many times have we just cried at like the beauty of God's grace? I'm like, no, because you were there and I was there. Of like, was this fake? And I think about all the memories and all the piety. I think of, but I do feel the necessity to unlearn so much.
Mm.
And then it became asking me, okay, what do I like? What am I going to keep and what am I going to throw away? Because it sounds like with you just bumping into others, um, post IDC, post church and everything. One of the things, I guess, an idea that I was introduced to through Christianity was just the dignity of everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that seems to be a very universal Christian idea, at least in principle. And it's like, no, I need to keep that. Um, and I think of just other things, and I'm like, okay, how much of this is just church culture of like the last 100 years? Is this like an American evangelical Christianity thing? Is this unrecognizable to people 1,000 years ago? Um, and I don't know. It just made me think of like, what else would I want to keep? Because it's like, of course, the same reason why you didn't delete Dr.Quarles' number. It's like I want to pass that on to someone else and treat someone else that way, the way he treated you.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm like, is that essentially the sum of Christianity? Like, is there anything else that I should keep from that? Because that seems to be a pretty lofty thing of just like, is that Christianity just 101 of being that person for someone else? And I don't know. These are the kind of thoughts that I'm just sitting here in my childhood bedroom, and I'm like, should I keep anything else Christianity? Like, I don't know. I feel like that's the one. And kind of hearing that, is there anything else that comes to mind when you hear that?
You mean like, are there any things that I think that like I should keep over from
Yeah,
Christianity or
from
religion?
a previous life.
Wow, that's a good question. Um, you might have to edit out some waiting time for me to think of an answer to this question.
No, for sure, yeah.
It is a good question. I think I don't know. I think there's kind of a maybe a paradigm shift jumping kind of into the LGBT community. I think a lot of gay people there. I think there tends to be slightly more of a survival mentality that's kind of ingrained into the culture, into the community. Because, like I've said, like there are a lot of people who have gone through some kind of trauma, or like their families disowned them, they were sexually abused, they were physically abused, the list goes on. And so a lot of people in the community kind of have this like survival mentality, I think, and hopefully that begins to die out as it becomes more acceptable as to be gay. But I think a lot of people tend to have a lack, or like the idea. I think the thing that stuck with me the most is this idea of being gracious with people, which I've seen that can lack in the gay community to a degree, because for a number of reasons. I think that it's the survival mentality of like, I have to figure out who I need to keep out of my life and keep them at a distance, and like I'll fight them off if I have to, or like maybe they're holding on to something, like rightfully so, like there's a reason they can't be around a certain person, or just maybe a lack of forgiveness for some people. And so like and not that like I'm ever going to go up to somebody and say, you know, like you have to learn to forgive this person. If they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. It's up to them. But I think something that like maybe that I want to hold on to, or like I try to remind myself of, is even if I don't see other people, you know, living it out, or it being a part of their life regularly, is trying to be humble and gracious, like kind of that emphasis on that. Because you know, I've met people in my community, and then not even because maybe it doesn't have anything to do with like their sexual orientation, but just they're in the community and they just have like zero to desire to ever admit when they're wrong, or like ever admit, you know, that they should forgive somebody. And I'd like to think that I've kept that practice from time to time of just being humble enough to admit when I was wrong, or examine myself, and then, you know, forgive people when I should. Um, and not that that's not like, I can imagine some people in church hearing this and be like, yeah, see, like they're not, they don't understand grace or forgiveness. I'm like, they're humans. It's not like it's unique to them. Like,
Yeah.
if you're in a community, you're involved with humans, and you're all naturally going to have a pitfall of some kind. And it's probably going to evolve around how you get along with everyone else. So yeah, I think I think maybe if there's one thing that kind of was ingrained in me, but from an early age, it was, and I think it served me well in every area of life, is just kind of coming towards other people with no expectation, being willing to take the weirdest or the craziest or the most offensive person, and give them the benefit of the doubt, and be gracious as I can and as forgiving as I can, and then learning when to back off. But that's, I hope that answers your question.
No, definitely it does. It made me think, because I'm so bad at that, like of just being like a judgmental person. Like I don't want to be at the same table as some people. Like at the worst part of myself is there's that, but then a part of the Christian life that I witnessed was how quick confession was. So even if it happened, like I had so many people, and it was like a normal practice to, hey, can I talk to you just for a quick second before we go in? Like, hey, I was being a jerk earlier. I really shouldn't have said, like a true apology.
Yeah,
And I've witnessed true apologies, and they'll explain themselves. They'll give a reason why, that maybe they'll quote some scripture, but it'll be like, I can't hold it against this person because this is as good as an apology as you're going to get. And it would happen. And I would see true, I guess, sincerity. And and just the interesting things that maybe we saw was just as a community, this was practiced.
yeah,
And I think that's what made it's such a complicated relationship, because there were so many things I really like about this. Um, and obviously so many things I don't, but that's another piece of the magic that I would like to keep, because it's kind of like, just being quick to be like, hey, oof, I got out of line.
yeah,
Like, my bad.
yeah.
Um,
That's fair. Like I've even in my relationship with my fiance, you know, I've seen like where he respects that, you know, the willingness to admit when I was wrong and apologize for something sincerely. And I think that served my relationship with him well. Um, but I think it I think that there's a bit of privilege that goes along with being like in that kind of a church community. Like, you know, most most people at like a lot of these Southern Baptist churches, or like at IDC or at Southeastern or whatever. Maybe it's changed since then. I don't know. I haven't looked it up or got involved, but like a lot of the like there's like class privilege, racial privilege, you know, or like there's this community where like there are some severe offenses that can occur, but it's also like I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'm trying to say. Um, where like it's easier to forgive somebody, you know, like
mm,
in your church or in your community, because there's sometimes I feel like, at least in my experience, there wasn't a lot of heavy stuff that I was really dealing with. apart from like the counseling I went through there at the end. And so when trying to compare, like, well, it's easy for our church to practice forgiveness, whereas you have an outside community that is still actively dealing with, racial injustice or inequality or poverty or trauma or sexual assault or whatever it might be. Like, we're not comparing the same thing here.
Okay.
There's a natural, I think, privilege or leg up that you have when you're on the inside of a church and get to talk about how easy forgiveness is, or talk about like being a forgiving person. Like, that doesn't translate the same way to everybody.
Yeah. And that's why I'm like, this is so freaking complicated. I was like, oh my God. like I'm trying to, so, okay, what do I keep? I'm like, was this hypocrisy? And then just kind of doubting everything. But James, I want you to take me back. I remember it was some party. We had a get together. We were dressed up. I remember because Michael was there and he was like the Google Maps thing. And I think it was a Halloween party. And you were there. It was Heather and Kendra. And yeah, way back. And I remember laughing so freaking hard because you and Michael were acting a fool. And y'all, I just remember I was like, dude, James had me dying. And that's like one of the key memories I have of you, was just how funny you were and how much you and Michael made me freaking laugh that night. And then you were gone.
Oh.
And I was like, where's James? And I was like, I'm like, okay, all right. So take me through what exactly happened to you.
I've definitely talked about it. It's just so comical to me that people just can't, come out and say it. It's just like, he's no, it's hilarious.
I'm like, all right, is he dead? Should we go hang out with him? Because the point was like, they were just like, we shouldn't hang out with him. Because I don't think at the time, I don't think I had your number or anything. And it was like, we never hung out like one-on-one, I don't think.
Right.
But it just seemed
you
like
shouldn't hang out with me.
The in-between was just like, it'd just be best if he spent some time alone, which is a very interesting decision. Of all the decisions to make, this is a decision you made. But it was like, oh, and it just, I guess, like what I'm reading and what I hear about church discipline, I guess is the way to go. I guess I suspend my own belief. And if anything, I don't think I ever reached out to you or anything. I was going through my own bullshit.
Right.
But I was like, I kept you as a Facebook friend. Like, God, like, that's the least I could do. I wasn't gonna be one of those people to send you 2 paragraphs and all the scripture in between and me secretly invite you to Applebee's to talk about it. I'm like, I will not be this asshole. I'm like, I'll just keep him as a Facebook friend. And now looking back, because I kind of went through my own version of disenchantment of like, I don't know what the hell's going on anymore. I had that happen to me, and I was like, and yeah. So I know all about the getting rid of friends and deleting numbers of like, all right, so you just saw me as this person, and I'm not. I don't serve you anymore, and I'm not this. I'm getting rid of this identity, and you cannot see me as a person without that. And I was like, dude, this is fucked up. But no, I want you to tell the story of.
Yeah. So so I was living with a bunch of other guys in Wake Forest. We were all roommates. There was like four or five of us in this one house. And I had kind of reconnected with somebody who was like in the closet back home in Louisiana. And by reconnecting, I mean, we just kind of were talking, and I think kind of slowly find out, like, are you gay? I'm gay. Like, like you didn't want to fully admit it, but you kind of wanted to pry and see if like you could discover it and not get in trouble or whatever. But it mentioned using like these like dating apps, and I guess I kind of knew about them, like Tinder or whatever. At around the time I started to discover that Grindr was a thing, and I was like, no, what are you talking about? Like, I think he had met somebody through that, and so I downloaded them for fun or whatever, and I was just kind of, I think I'd only selected guys to show up. I don't think I selected girls. And I had met up with a guy one night, and we had decided to, I guess, attempt some kind of relationship. We went on for about, I don't know, like 3 or 4 months, so it didn't last super long. And then there was kind of this like fallout between us, and then I was freaking out, panicking in the moment, and it was like, I've got to confess this to the church. I've got to tell them. So like, it resulted in me kind of being honest with him and just saying, hey, I've been seeing this guy for the past couple of months. From there, they developed this kind of like counseling, or like this plan to like meet with a pastor and like my growth group leader. I forgot that's what they were called, by the way, until Sam mentioned it. I was like, I'm like, oh my God, all of these like
all the lingo coming back.
These words bringing me back. And so we start doing this meeting thing where I'm basically sitting in a couch across from like 1 or 2 people, and we kind of do this like dissection, like them trying to untangle.
Wait. You confessed this straight to a pastor?
Yeah.
So you went straight to the source.
Yeah.
All right, James.
Yeah. Because he was, I think he was my growth group leader at one point.
Okay.
And then it split into 2 different ones, and he ended up either becoming the pastor. Yeah, he got selected as like the 5th or 6th pastor of like 5 or whatever, because like his character or whatever, and like being a good, faithful servant. But yeah, it was him and one other, at least pretty consistently. Sometimes it was just one, like one-on-one, but it was basically me kind of sitting at their couch, or on his couch upstairs in his office. And sometimes it kind of felt like, if you can imagine like those scenes from movies where like the patient is laying on a bed and there are just like 2 doctors talking over them to one another about the person that's like right there. Yeah. That's what the majority of it felt like, which is kind of like they were diagnosing me and like unraveling me and like figuring me out, but they weren't telling me anything. They were telling each other. But it was a little insulting, like, we figured you out, like we know what your problem is, or like how you're behaving, like, so I think remember one point they were like smiling about it. I don't think they meant it maliciously, but it's just the way it came off was, really kind of insulting and a little, disheartening. So we kind of got into this repetition of me like doing an inventory of sin and an inventory of this area of my life, and like diving into like family, and like there were like spreadsheets and like a program created by Matt Chandler and all this. I don't know that I could recall the details of those conversations or what we went over. Sam mentioned it in his podcast. The guy he talked about at the end was me.
Yeah.
So for those who are listening, I'm not surprised. It was me. But yeah, so we at some point, where like I feel like we're not really addressing it. That's where that like idea of holding me accountable to something I never really had the chance to figure out myself. Like there was so much more to it than just like, what am I doing that's sinful, and having a sin inventory and understanding the repercussions and all that kind of shit. But literally, I think the subtle buildup of trauma, what I did to myself, what I experienced, growing up in a, broken home for the most part. There were just so many factors that kind of fed into, who I was and how I processed things. I come from a long family of mental illness. My mother has bipolar disorder. So like there have been indications of like maybe areas I need to work on with my mental health. So just a whole bunch of shit that just no one's even really aware of, because I'm not talking to people that are qualified to figure it out. Um, and at some point, I finally was like, I feel like I'm getting no closer to. I don't know who I am. Like, I don't know what you want me to account for. I don't even know who I am. Um, every aspect of my life is like it's dictated by somebody else and what their expectation of me is. And so I finally got to the point to where uh, after I kind of walked out on the last meeting, I was like, this is done. I'm not going back to this. And I was I think at that time I was already kind of talking to somebody else in the background, another guy, and kind of, and he introduced me to Stonewall and the LGBT community. And so I kind of began to feel like if I did leave the church, if I did leave this church community, that like, yeah, I'd have somewhere else to go. Like I'd have maybe I did fit in somewhere else. And then from there, it was a complete gear shift, just a change in my life where I began to realize like there are people who are like me and accept me for me. Like I don't have to meet some expectation. I feel like I can be myself. We have, similar interests, similar thoughts, and it was all kinds of people. People who were straight, people who were, they were married, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were longtime partners. Straight, gay, bi, black, white, young, old, just this like just melting pot of different people and different experiences, and just immediately began to feel like I was discovering who I was for the first time, because there was no pressure to meet an expectation. And then that was where I was like, yeah, I can do this. I can find the freedom I've been looking for to begin to build a life. And so that's where how that gear shift kind of happened.
I feel like I was like, James, you sound so lucky, blessed to have this like segue into it. Because there's so many people I knew who were just like, I got me in my car. That's it. So I don't know what the hell I'm going. But to just have that shift and go right into it. Now at this time during the transition, were there other people trying to reach out to you? Um and I guess, or was it as I guess traumatic for you to be, because from what I think I understand, you were excommunicated from
Yeah,
IDC.
I think that's officially what happened, because if I remember correctly, they'll kind of do like this. They might do like an emergency meeting of the members, or like this, like I think like once a week meeting or something, where like if there's any event like that occurs where like the pastors decide to excommunicate somebody, they'll inform the church of who it is. And so like I remember being told that had happened to me. Um, there was a small group of friends that I had, about 3 or 4 people, and one of them in particular kind of kept up with me. We had a mutual hobby that we enjoyed. That he kind of got me. He got me into cycling, and he for a while, he kind of kept up with me, and eventually that friendship faded. As far as people reaching out to me without having to see me in person, I distinctly remember one person trying to call me, and it wasn't even somebody like I was like super close to, or like I don't know that I call us friends. But it was kind of, I was also a little pissed off, because I was kind of like, oh, like now you want to talk, like, but whatever. But no, there was not a lot of reach out from anybody that I recall, after the kind of the walking away moment. And to be fair, I probably wouldn't have gotten very far with anyone trying to reach out to me, because I kind of cut out a lot of people as well, and like wanted to kind of, you started a new Facebook, which you've probably discovered. So like I kind of needed a restart for what felt like to maintain and protect my mental sanity.
Yes.
You know, to just, and not that I didn't still have issues to deal with or work out, and like they were even new issues that popped up. But it felt like there had to be a degree of severance for me to just to feel safe and to feel like I wasn't going to be pressured into being someone I wasn't. And I like to think that maybe if there were a couple of people who were like, hey, like I'm cool with you being gay, like, or whatever, I miss you, we had a good friendship or whatever, like I probably would have been like more open to that. But I definitely had one or two like pull the like gospel card or Jesus card and like Romans whatever, like I love you, don't give up on Jesus, that kind of stuff. So like there was one or two of those, but other than that, there was not a whole lot of, especially not from IDC. Like I had a phone book full of people that had my number, like could have texted or called and got, and like probably 1% said anything, and the rest I never heard from again.
Now, did you tell Dr.Quarles when this was going on? Did you ever reach out to him?
No. I mean, there was one point where he and his wife, and their son was still in high school at the time. They had a house that was east of Southeastern, about like 20, 30 minutes out. And they would invite us over, like all of us who were from LC, like they wanted to maintain that connection. So they would invite us over for dinner like once a week or once every other week, which was really nice of them. And we would sit around for hours and talk and hang out. But I don't even know that I could begin to grasp like what that conversation would be like. Because while I did love and respect the man, like there wasn't a personal connection quite that deep. You know, it's someone who like I kind of viewed as a giant in my life, you know, and such a well-respected person. It's like, how do I admit this very sensitive thing about myself, you know, to somebody who's in a lot of ways very intimidating to me. I don't have any doubt that he would have responded in a kind and loving way, but it felt a little like overwhelming for my mind at the time, I think, to even consider reaching out to him.
Well, I mean, that's what made it so hard for me to wrap my head around, because I was like, James doesn't have anybody up here. I'm like, what do you mean? Like you guys just stopped talking to him? Because it just seemed like it was like, all right, let's push him out the nest, and if he flies, he flies. He'll come back if he's meant to come back, which is so fucked up. Like, is that the plan?
Yeah, I certainly didn't hear from anybody. There was one, two. He wasn't really a part of Southeastern, but I met him through. You remember Nick Lamar?
Yeah, because we used to play basketball. Yeah.
I think he went off to college in Rhode Island, and I think when he came back, this was like months or weeks after all this went down, and he was like, "What?" and like tried to reach out to me, but I think at that point I wasn't quite ready to talk about it with him, and he probably would have been the most understanding person of it all. But yeah, there was almost nobody that was Southeastern, not IDC, that I heard from at that point. I don't think I heard from Sam, and like that's not me. Like, you know, Sam and I are good. Like I don't, you know, whatever. But there was, for the most part, yeah, there was nobody reaching out or really talking to me about it. And I think at the time, like and now that you're saying all this, I'm kind of like, yeah, that is kind of fucked up. But I at the time was kind of diving headfirst into like this luck of a situation I found myself in, where like I started to very rapidly build this network of people in this community of people that I didn't feel so anxious or isolated, you know, like I kind of could see myself building a life here. And then thankfully it took off. So
during this transition period, it just sounds, the way you're telling it just sounds very hopeful. We're just like, no, like I seem to met these great people. Um, I'm in a new city. Like I don't. It just seems not
Yeah.
that bad. But at the same time, it's like the way we talked about it years after. We were like, yo, it was so sad. It was so fucked up. You got to get James on the show. You got to get James because I need to hear what exactly happened because I wouldn't know what to do if I was in that situation. But it
Yeah.
sounds like to you, you're just like was it 2 weeks of just crying every day? Was there anything like that of just like I guess they didn't like me or they didn't like me enough
There
to
was there was a lot of anxiety for sure. Um, I don't like. I feel like processing all of this has taken so much time to really understand, even up to this day. Like I'm finally seeing a therapist, and I had the reason it started is I had epiphany like a couple weeks ago. Where I was like, holy fuck! I think the reason that like I don't even want to see a therapist is my last situation like this was so traumatic to me mentally that I didn't feel like I could trust to talk to somebody. Like I didn't, like I was scared of that idea of opening up to somebody and trying to work through things I knew I needed to work on. Um, and then I finally got one, and it's been great. But um, there, it's not like while there was like a quick moment or like days or weeks of me, I kind of took a leap of faith and that I would be okay. And it paid off. Like I managed to reach out into the darkness and grab a hold of something that like ended up being me being free to be myself. But trying to unravel the trauma of what you go through mentally, what you put yourself through, what the pressure you feel from other people, that just takes so long to unravel. Like there have been nights and days and weekdays or whatever of me trying to process all this, like that happened months or years later. um it's kind of like the storm has to kind of wear down this like bastion of confusion and anxiety and hatred, like just over time, like the water just has to wash it away a little bit by little bit, and until it's not dominating your life and you feel like you can carry on and move on. So um in the moment, it, did I probably feel bad at that time? No, because I I don't know how I could have felt bad when I finally felt free.
yeah.
You know, to figure out who I was and to actually learn that I could like myself. I could love myself. It took a crowd of a bunch of crazy strangers, like all different kinds of people, showing me that I was somebody who was lovable and like I could appreciate who I was and believe in myself, and like that was okay. I was fine the way that I was. Um, and it was, I think that laid the foundation for me, over the past decade to, well, not quite a decade, but um, the past seven, God, what's the timeline here? God, 6 years, 5 years, I don't know. To just finally start to build a life that's got some structure and foundation to it and like makes sense to me. But I think that the thing that I think that the sentence that has kind of stuck in my mind all of these years, and I've said it a couple times already, is I was I had so much going on and so much to figure out about myself, and I was never given the room to do that. And I suddenly felt like I was being on trial and having to be held accountable for something I didn't fully understand myself. Um, like you're not you're not hopefully going to put a 4-year-old on trial for something they don't understand. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was such an infant and or a small child in understanding who I was or how I felt or like what got me to where I am or what am I holding on to that's causing anxiety and pain and depression, self-hatred, and suddenly being forced to have to talk about that in a very uncomfortable way with people who weren't qualified or equipped to help me understand myself. Um, that was painful. That hurt. That there was a lot of confusion. Um, a lot of self-hatred. And so I ended up doing okay. I ended up being all right. Um, I like to think that I'm a survivor. Come hell or high water, I'm going to find a way to survive through anything. And so far I have. So I guess it's a both and. Like, yeah, things went to shit from time to time, but not all at once.
God, I think it's so interesting, just because I only saw what was on Facebook, and I was like, okay, he works at Legends. All right, doing. I'm like, all right. So my other mutual friends were just like, dude, yeah, he's going there.
He's a flamer, man.
Dude, I was like, dude, he's working at the club, the gay club. Like, bro, yeah, he's not coming back. Like, I don't know. Let's pray for him. And I was like, I'm like, I don't know, guys. I'm like, it seems kind of happy. Like, I don't know.
Fun.
Like, God, that's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Legends has its own reputation. Like, it's kind of like if you're born here and you're familiar with it, it's probably not high on your list of like gay clubs, but for a lot of other people, it's great. Legends has been a great experience for me, because that's the place where, working every weekend, I'm meeting all kinds of people. Like I said, like I've met people who are comfortable their male presenting as females. Like maybe they wear what's considered like feminine clothing, or like trans people, male to female, female to male, non-binary, people of all different kinds of races, people from different countries, different states. It's just like this hub, this miniature, like almost like a grand central station of people that come to Legends because they know they're going to be safe and they're going to be free to be themselves. And so like I just immediately I started to be so grateful that I have got to meet so many different people who weren't like me, but the commonality that we had was that we were free to be ourselves, and even if we were different, we could like approve of and like protect and be there for one another. Like, I'm not a drag queen, I'm not trans, those aren't the same thing. That's not what I'm saying. Or like I'm not, whatever other category that exists in the queer community. I'm, a gay white man, but we all recognize that the commonality we have is that we fall outside of what's the normal. We're a part of this community that has a lot of minorities, and so we celebrate that, and we hold each other up, and we protect one another, and we support one another. And so, not that it's always been perfect, but it was just I almost feel I learned more about the world I live in and the humanity of the people that inhabit it in the 4 years working at Legends than I did my entire life coming from a religious background.
Ooh. Okay. So I feel like because these are such stark communities, jumping out of one into another. And it sounds like LGBT community in Raleigh really saved your life. Maybe that's not even an understatement. But were there overlaps in maybe some unsightly stuff? Because I don't know anything about that community that you were in, but it just seems like the disenchantment didn't happen for this community. And I want to know maybe why. Is it still a special place for you and those people? And why do you think that never faded away if it's still magic to you?
Yeah. And like I said earlier, this isn't to say that like the LGBT community doesn't have its own issues, and that there aren't some of the same problems you see religious, non-religious, whatever kind of community. But there are still toxic people. There are still people who fuck up, or like whatever. You're working with people. That's what you're going to get every time. But even I've been in a gay community here in Raleigh, and then we lived in Richmond for a while. There was no Stonewall League up there. We made a lot of, like, one of our best friends. We met her in Richmond. She still lives there, and she's part of the LGBT community. and she's a lesbian, and like she was our roommate, and like we loved her to death. Like one of the best living experiences we ever had was with her. Like and like to this day, we're like, yeah, you're coming to our wedding, so like she like we constantly try to imagine our life with her in it. So um, getting to even be across state borders and just meet a whole new group of people that are like us. So, like it didn't even change crossing the state really. And I think that no, there hasn't really been disenchantment, even if there are problems that like I've had with the community or with certain people in the community that I've wanted to work out or like have caused, like maybe arguments or disagreements or whatever. But I think for the most part, like we all have understood what it's like to be on this side, when so many of us are still feeling the effects of being minorities and being people who are kind of like the outcasts. And, the past 4 years, with the Trump administration further highlighted that. And at the end of the day, we know who like we're going to fight for and who we're going to stand up for, and like who are the people that are outcast and who are, are left, the people that would be like the parable of the Good Samaritan, where like people just kind of constantly walking by the guy who's dying on the side of the road, and then the one person who was considered to be an outcast by the religious community because he was a Samaritan, picking the guy up and taking care of him, bringing him back to life, essentially. We know who those people are. We know that we've all been there in some way, and so there's this uniting factor of being different and understanding what's really important about being able to be yourself and love who you want to love. And so there, I do hope for the day. Like, ultimately, I think the goal of our community is to get to where like we don't have to be a separate community, but maybe it's only because we want to. Like our safe spaces don't have to exist. We just want them to exist. We're like, it becomes such not a big deal to be gay that, children don't get kicked out of their homes because their parents are religious, or, people get abused in some kind of way because of how they identify. But, even still, for the time being, I think that, no, there hasn't really been any kind of disenchantment, even if it's gotten rough from time to time. I know what the potential of this community is, that anyone can belong, anyone can feel free, anyone can be themselves. And I part of what my goal at Legend was always to be was like I was going to try to stick up for the people who I think maybe got overlooked. And I saw somebody who maybe was even different for our community, who maybe feel like they didn't fit in or they were uncomfortable. Tried to go out of my way to be nice to them and not let them think that I thought they were too weird or too out there. And so I always tried to be as kind as I could. And so I think the potential that we're going to lift anybody up, and we're going to take care of them, and we're going to accept them in the community, even if we haven't always done that perfectly, I think has been such a strong uniting factor, because there are communities like the church community where you can be kicked out because of who you are,
Golly. Yeah. Well, James, it sounds like you found something very special, especially after, such a dead end of being at IDC. And even then, just because it's so hard to imagine, what tomorrow looks like when something like that happens. Seeing these two people stand over you, essentially doing this psychological surgery on you, and you realize they don't know what they're doing, and you're like, I gotta get the hell out of here. But even now, you are engaged.
Yeah.
You're smiling. And it takes me aback, and this is the magic I see in life, is people who have the worst day, and the way they describe their life, like all these things are true. It's the most fucked up day I've had, and then years later, here they are. And I guess you described it. I was like, James, you survived. I was like, you're a survivor, truly. But what are you up to? Like, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so we kind of had a precursor to the shit show that was 2020. 2019 had dealt us a pretty rough hand. We had a few unexpected hiccups kind of throw us for a loop. But we thankfully have had a good support system with family, like my fiance's family especially, have really helped us out. And so we got engaged 2000 New Year's Eve 2019 at Walt Disney World. One of the first times we had met, my fiance and I, he had talked about how he always wanted to get engaged at Walt Disney World in front of the castle. And so we took a family vacation in 2019 down there, and we were like, okay, I don't know when this is going to happen again. Thankfully, we did in 2019 before shit really got out of control.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a picture up here I'm looking at of us, right after the proposal in front. There's the castle in the background and all that. And so, yeah, it's real sweet. And he's been fantastic. He has challenged me in a lot of ways that I didn't know I needed to be challenged in. I think we've been very complimentary to each other. I encourage him to work on things that maybe he didn't know he had to work on, and vice versa. And so we've been engaged for a little over a year now. Hopefully getting married soon. We've been looking at houses, trying to figure out where we're going to live. We still want to be in Raleigh. We do love the area. I'm looking forward to when COVID lifts and I can go back to, putting effort and energy into being a part of the community and like rebuilding some friendships and things like that. I got a job working for Relias, which has been, I never understood how crucial a healthy company culture could be to your mental well-being until being in this company, because they have been fantastic and have, just revolutionized the way I view work and working for a company. And it's like, it's the most random thing. Like has nothing to do with art, has nothing to do with the Bible, has nothing to do with literally any part of my life. But it was an opportunity that I kind of just took because I wanted to do something other than just work at a bar all the time. And it ended up being a huge payoff. I'm super happy with where I'm at work-wise. I feel like I'm finally invested in like a professional career. And sometimes I wonder myself, like, did I waste my 20s like trying to figure too much out and deal with too much? And now that I'm here I just turned 30 last year. I'm turning 31 this year. And like now I'm looking forward to the next decade of being 30, because every year feels like it's just constantly getting better than the last. I used to think high school was the shit, and then I got to college like, fuck high school, this is the shit. I get out of college and come to North Carolina, no, this is the shit. Fuck being in Louisiana. And then I leave the church and come out as gay, and I'm like, no, this is like weird. It's just like, this is getting better and better. And so I'm, like, we've had to roll with a lot of punches, but we're slowly getting to where we want to be. I'm seeing a therapist, and God, if I could recommend anything, if you have insurance, figure out if it covers a therapist, please, because that has been great. Getting to work through a lot of this.
Because that's what, James, I'm like, that's why I also really wanted you to be on here, because I was like, I don't know what he did, but I think he figured it out. I was like, he's happy, he's engaged. I see you. I was like, you're reading. You actually read. Like you're saying, like, I go to therapy. I was like, dude, because there's so many people that we knew and people that I still try to keep up with them. And it's like, I wish that they could say the things that you're saying of, I am who I am and I'm happy. And I did the work to get to this point, and I want this for you. And I'm like, so with that said, it's like, I really want to thank you for coming on here and just showing, like, even though through all the bullshit, it's like, it's possible to make it to the other side. I'm like, look, it can pay off if you work hard and kind of like you said, like, if you roll with the punches, you can finally just relax and just be happy. But James, I really wanted to thank you for being on here, and thank you for really sharing your story with us.
Yeah. I'm happy to do it, and I really appreciate this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it ever since you asked me. But yeah, I guess with my final word to anybody who's listening, it definitely can and does get better. I think just a huge part of it is just being honest with yourself about who you are and what you really want, and finding people who encourage that, who kind of won't let you hide behind a facade or expectation, but be honest with who you are, and just take it one day at a time from there, and you can get to where you want to be.
Real quick, last question for you. It's the kind of question I'm going to try to ask most people. If you could go back to James on the couch, and he's thinking, "Oh God, what have I done? Where am I? How did I get here?" What would you say to that James? Pre legends, pre everything. That James. Is there any advice that you would give that person?
In 2020, there's like a $2 billion lottery. These are the numbers.
It's like, yeah, GameStop, Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, no, gosh. I think I would probably tell myself, don't don't take everything too seriously. Don't invest so much of your energy and your time into what's going on around you, because life will change and life will go on. It's easy to see where you're to see where you're at right now, and to think and be in despair or like stress out, but it's going to change. You're going to have another opportunity. It's never going to be too late for you to change your mind or to make it different than what it is.
Mm.
And don't be afraid to come out. I promise you, there's another world out there that you're not aware is there, and it's going to love you for who you are, and it's going to give you the room to be who you want to be. To just embrace that, embrace who you are, and everything will be okay.
All right, James, where can people find you?
Everywhere. I'm kind of addicted to social media, I think. Facebook under James Bradley. There's a James Arnold account that does that. I've ignored completely. So if you try to reach me there, it's not going to happen. I don't remember my Instagram handle because I just don't. I'm on there and on Twitter, so feel free to try to find me there if you can. If I'm comfortable and I like you, I might let you follow me. I make no promises, but I'm on Facebook. That's probably the best, easiest way to find me. I'm friends with you on there, so that's a good place to start, I guess, if somebody wants to try to reach out to me. Yeah.
All right, James. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Thanks.